Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Easter. It's Sunday, April 20th, 2025, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. You're watching Co-op for Two. Today's the finale of a series of letters we've been reading through, trying to solve the mystery of a case called Death of the Editor, written by none other than a viewer of this channel, Anna, who's with us today. Let me check in with the chat, see how everyone's doing. I'm quite interested in reading the solution to this letter, although I think we've gone on a little journey of suspects, but I do feel like with the last letter, we have wrapped it up with a little bow, and we do know who our murderer is, but I'd be curious to hear if anyone has any disagreements. But let's take a minute. We're in no rush. Let's see how everyone is doing today. These kinds of holidays are a popular time for the YouTube channels to sit and talk, and I don't know why we have to be any different. I'm not really a religious person, so I don't really follow what Easter is, but I do know that it's one of these holidays that's got some religion and some secular celebration of Easter bunnies and eggs and stuff. Anything else to talk about? Let me talk a little bit about a couple of things before we get started, and you guys in the meantime can tell me about what projects you're working on. So I haven't done much live streaming over the last week or two even. We finished up our 7th Citadel playthrough, which took about 70 hours, but I've been taking most of my spare time trying to get my 3rd case for New York Noir finished, and it's a bit of a struggle. Writing these mystery cases does not come natural to me, and it is like pulling teeth, but I'm making, I've got about 2/3 of it done, I think now. I feel like I'm over the worst of it. I still have to figure out how to wrap it up, conclude it. And at the same time, I'm trying to write a little guide for others who want to write mystery cases, trying to remember what problems have been overcome and how. But it's not easy. But in the meantime, something quite exciting has happened, which is that another programmer has stopped by the Discord for the Co-op for Two channel and has started in earnest writing map tools to play around with the New York Noir directories and search the map and show things in the map. And it was something I always hoped we would have. And Water, another viewer, another coder, has previously done some work on online directories. But Peter has done some stuff that I thought was going to take a long time before we ever saw. And it looks actually really good. It's really quite fun to browse around the maps online. And Peter has even made a little demonstration of how people could read the casebook online and search for stuff. So I think maybe sooner than I expected, we are on track for people being able to play test New York Noir games completely online without having to print anything out or juggle 5 different PDFs. And it's going to make writing and playtesting cases a lot easier because it will have support for people reporting bugs and giving feedback about cases much more easily and make it much more enjoyable to playtest cases. So I think this is a major step towards making it easier to write and test cases. So I'm excited about that. Anna says, I haven't played the first. Anna's written 3, half-written, or mostly written 3 cases for New York Noir. Anna wants them played right away. But I keep telling her they need to be play-tested a little bit more. Tablet-friendly, yeah, I think it'll be tablet-friendly as well. It's really quite a nice interface that he's come up with. And Water working on it as well. But I do think it's, as a complete package, it'll be fairly friendly to playtest cases and report issues. So exciting. And not only that, but advanced search for authors. So authors, it'll be a little easier to write cases. Are you using AI to help write your cases? I am not so far, but I'm not against it. And I have some ideas about that. But let's not get off track now. I've given you my little update. No one is giving updates about what they're doing, although Teresa is watching WrestleMania. Everything on my iPad. Okay. All right. No one else has reported anything else they're working on, any hobbies or projects. I wish you guys would do a little bit more of that. But let's recap our case, because the last letter was a bit of a breakthrough. So I had, previous to letter 3 from last week, I had settled on the fact that our guy, Francis, was going to expose someone, and that would be a reasonable motive. The other motives didn't seem strong enough to murder someone. But with last week's letter, we had a new suspect, a very good suspect, and that is the doctor. So Miriam was writing to us, the sister-in-law, and she starts telling us about, she gives us some more testimony where we learned that the doctor actually hasn't been seen for a couple weeks because he had an accident. A few light bruises when he eventually shows up. And then we get to hear a little bit more about the gun. Our guy didn't even have ammunition for it. It didn't even work, basically. So there's that. And then we had another major reveal. And that was about Mr. Reed, the assistant who lived upstairs for 2 years. He doesn't want to talk to the police. He doesn't want to talk to us. But we hear from the sister about a strange conversation that seemed very odd between the master of the house that got killed and Mr. Reed, who lives upstairs, who was a suspect of ours. And the conversation sounds a little bit too familiar. Mr. Reed says, "You've never cared about me at all. I won't stay in this house." And the master says, "David, please don't start again." So they aren't talking like master of the house and business owner and assistant. They're talking like they're sort of friends or family. And we have concluded that he is the illegitimate son. Either the illegitimate son or a gay lover, but we've gotten tripped up with that in the past. These historic cases, it's much more likely that it's an illegitimate son. And I think it starts to make sense that he is the illegitimate son. And when he comes home, we hear a little bit more. And he comes home and told him that Francis was dead. He collapses in a chair like a ghost. So I don't think he's the suspect. He's just the son whose father is now dead. And we hear a little bit more from Mr. Reed. And he admits that he lied about his alibi. And now he says, well, I was at the competing journal. And they expect Mr. Reed to be grateful that he was allowed to live in the attic, but he's not grateful at all. He says Francis owed him much more, some attic space, and he threatened to unveil some very inconvenient truths if I continued this harassment, and so on. So we think it's all consistent with him being the illegitimate son. But more interestingly, at the end of this letter, we get this big reveal about the doctor, the physician, Mr. McCormick. He's a good friend of the family and a good physician. However, he's been sexually harassing Miriam, the sister. And when he catches her alone, he tries to make all these indecent proposals to her. Finally, she tells Francis, and Francis gets very angry, and he says, "Don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of this. This doctor is totally out of line." And he says he's going to take care of it. And then a day later or so, he tells her, "The doctor's not coming back anymore. I fired him. He's gone. It's over. We're never going to deal with him again." This is around the time, I think, that we hear Francis talking about an expose. I think this is like a week ago. So this could be the person that he was writing an expose about. But it's not over yet. Because she mentions again that McCormick had an accident near a few days earlier or near the death of Francis. Now remember, Francis is like found on the ground, bruised, his clothing is disheveled, so it seems like maybe Mr. McCormick, the physician, didn't have an accident, but got in a fight and is lying about having an accident. But after the death, eventually he shows up and he behaves like a gentleman, and we hear a little bit more about the gun. But then, as Miriam wraps up her letter, she says, well, he wouldn't have taken the gun. He would never use it anyone. It didn't even work. He didn't have ammunition. But maybe if he was trying to scare someone, he would have taken it. Before she signs off, she says, Helene, the children's assistant, whatever you call them, the live-in tutor, has finally agreed to tell the truth about something. And then Helene writes us, and here's where we have the little final piece of the puzzle where everything clicks into place. Helene says, well, you know how Miriam was telling you the doctor was harassing her, sexually harassing her? Well, he's been doing the same thing to me, but worse. And she says, it got so bad that I told Miriam I'm going to have to leave this house because I can't take this guy behaving so indecently. And Miriam says, I'm going to talk to the master and we'll get it worked out. And Helene says, don't tell him it's me because I don't want to cause trouble. Okay. And Helene says, but something happened the day before the master died. She was taking a walk with the kids, and the physician approached her, ran into her on the street, approached her, started behaving improperly, and put a note in her hand. And the note was a threat. And it said, "You have to meet me at 7 p.m. in the park behind the tall bushes. Otherwise, I'm going to lie and tell your master that you've behaved like a wanton woman every time you're alone, and it's going to get you fired, whatever." And Helene totally breaks down when she reads this note. She's being blackmailed to have some sexual relations with the doctor. She breaks down and starts crying, and Francis, the master of the house, finds her crying. And he says, "What's going on?" And she shows him the blackmail note and confesses everything, that this doctor has been harassing her, and now he's threatened to lie about her. And Francis gets very angry and he says, "Don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of it." And the thing to note is that all of the details that the doctor gave her in the note about where to meet her are consistent with how he died. The doctor told Helene to meet him in the park at 7 behind the tall bushes on the very day, at the very time, in the very location that Francis is found dead. So we get a very consistent picture here where Francis fires the doctor, and then the doctor goes one step further, is trying to blackmail Helene, and Francis has had enough. And so Francis goes in her place to meet the doctor, to confront him, brings the gun with him to threaten the doctor, where we think now they got into a scuffle. The wound that killed Francis is consistent with the butt of a gun. So they got into a scuffle. The gun was taken away from Francis and used by the doctor to hit him on the back of the head, either to keep him from revealing facts to the community about the doctor, or during a scuffle, during a fight. And then the limping person, we had some good debates about whether the person was always had a limp or not. Now we think it's consistent with them getting into an actual fight and the doctor getting bruised up and limping away. So it feels like everything has fallen into place now. So before we read the solution, does anyone want to offer any alternative theories, either about our main case of who has killed Francis, if you think it wasn't, if you think it was well, it really can't be a premeditated murder if we're right about this, because Francis has just gone in place of Helene, so the doctor doesn't expect him. But there are some details you could theorize about. I think that Reed is the illegitimate son, and I think that they got into a scuffle over the gun, and the gun is what hit him in the back of the head. So if you have any disagreements with any of those facts, now would be the time to get those on the record. If you think, was hit on the back of the head. So the only really open question for me, well, one is whether Reed is the illegitimate son, but I think he is. Remember, this was based on a true story, so maybe Anna will tell us. I'd love to hear from Anna what facts she changed and hear how she wrote it. So after we're done playing, hopefully Anna will tell us a little bit more about the process and what it was like, and we can offer some constructive criticism. So the only part I'm not 100% sure about is whether Francis threatened to reveal. I'm curious about whether the expose was always going to be about the doctor, and whether the doctor freaked out and realized that he was going to be exposed and then hit Francis on the back of the head, or whether it was just a fight over the gun that got out of control and the doctor never really meant to kill him. But maybe that's splitting hairs about whether when someone's about to expose you and you're about to have your life ruined, maybe you're not even aware whether your actions are excessive to the point of killing someone or just in the middle of a fight. All right, any comments before we read our final solution letter here? Harry says, I agree with your theory. Marlene is our resident conspiracy theorist. Marlene typically has some extra conspiracy elements to her theories of the case. Marlene, are you convinced that we've got the solution here, or do you think there's something a little more complicated? Tracy Wright has come into the channel to say hello. Marlene says it's very straightforward, which could be a setup. There we go. Marlene has not let us down. She has come up with her conspiracy, which is that this is all a setup. All right, let us read our solution here. So it looks like we're going to hear from Sarah, who originally hired us, and we're going to get a letter from Miriam, and then a letter from Anna herself. Okay, here we go. Here's Sarah writing to us. Dear Mr. Riker, it's exactly a month since my dear Francis's death, so I find it befitting to write to you on this day and thank you for all your help with this terrible murder case. Cousin Davy was right. You did find the culprit only by reading our letters, while the police were ready to give up on any further investigation. Fortunately, Officer Fox was ready to give it a last try after I showed him your letter, so he summoned Dr. McCormick to the police station for questioning. Turned out, this double-faced, deceitful fraud of a man quickly broke under the weight of the officer's questions, and he admitted to killing Francis in the park, though he vehemently claimed it was self-defense. They also found Francis's revolver in the doctor's house. I can still can hardly believe it. I have to tell you, Mr. Reichler, when I first read your letter in which you suggested that the doctor was the killer, I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even finished reading the whole thing when I ran to my sister to complain about this terrible joke you were trying to make at a poor widow's expense. But Miriam was very calm and suggested reading the whole letter before I passed judgment on it. I must tell you, Mr. Reichler, my blood froze in my veins when I heard my sister talk like that. I realized right away that I must have been led down the garden path by Dr. McCormick, and after reading your whole letter, I could see that was indeed the case. That deceitful, horrible man, how he smiled in our faces day after day and pretended to be the very model of an honest gentleman, while harassing first poor Helene and then my sister all this time. I can't believe I fell for his lies. I was so ashamed of it and begged for my sister's forgiveness. I also told Helene that she mustn't be ashamed of anything that happened because it wasn't her fault. And I thank both of them for speaking up, although it's not easy in this town. Officer Fox told us there'll be a trial soon, and we all have to testify in front of a jury. I know people's tongues will wag and try to blame the poor women who suffered from that insolent man's unwanted advances. People in this town have already proven how narrow-minded and petty they can be if someone dares challenge their antiquated rules and ideas. But we will stand firm through any horrible gossip. I know my Francis would want us to be brave. I'll write you again after the trial, Mr. Reichler, but God bless you for your help. Sincerely, Mrs. Sarah M. Davis. All right, so we got our guy. All right, let's read what Miriam is going to tell us about here. Dear Mr. Reichler, my sister asked me to write this final letter in her place because she hasn't got the energy to take a pen in her hands after what happened at the trial. I wish to God I could write to you under different circumstances because they acquitted Dr. McCormick. Can you believe this? I myself can hardly believe it, though I was there and witnessed that whole shameful affair. Helene also told him about the note in which that hateful man tried to blackmail her into going to the park on that fateful evening. It turned out that it was Frances who went to the secret meeting in her stead, determined to put a stop to the doctor's misdeeds once and for all. I told the jury Francis had a pistol which he kept in his drawer in the study, and Susan, the maid, added that she saw Francis rifling through his drawers the last time she took him his tea to his study on the day her master died. So it turns out Francis took his revolver with him to the meeting, although it wasn't loaded, as Francis told Susan when she tried to clean the revolver in the past. Still, it could have proven a useful tool to scare someone should it be necessary. Dr. McCormick testified that Francis started to upbraid him for his improper conduct towards the governess when he arrived at the meeting place. The doctor first tried to defend himself by saying that Mademoiselle LeBlanc was an adult, so this was none of Francis's business. But my brother-in-law threatened to expose his ungentlemanly conduct in his paper. There's the expose, as we were theorizing. In answer to that accusation, McCormick supposedly replied that the governess was the one who tried to seduce him, and not the other way around. And he also mentioned that the public would believe a gentleman and not a foreign servant if it came to an expose. Francis lost his temper at that point, so he took out the revolver from his pocket, aiming it at the doctor. But Dr. McCormick knew about my brother-in-law's pacifist views, of course, and the fact that he had avoided duels at all costs in the past, so he thought that Francis wouldn't be able to shoot him and succeeded in taking the gun from Francis. But then my disarmed brother-in-law supposedly started to beat the doctor with his walking stick. McCormick had the nerve to complain to the jury that Francis dealt such hard blows to his face that he was fearful for his life. So in self-defense, he blindly struck back with his own walking stick, which had a round metal head. He swore he only dealt one counterblow and saw the other man collapse to the ground with a bloody head. He said he panicked at that point, so he pulled his hat over his face and fled the park. That shameful man even had the nerve to complain about how he had to stay in bed for days following this incident. His lawyer gave a speech afterwards about how Dr. McCormick was only a common man whose honor and respectability had been impugned by some vicious and vengeful women, meaning me and Helene, of course, after they failed to seduce him with their vile attempts. He also said that his client was bodily attacked by another man who believed himself better than others, but who ultimately was the pawn of these vile women who wanted to see the doctor's reputation dragged through the mud. It was revolting how this lawyer tried to blacken our names, those of myself and Helene, and of poor Francis. The prosecutor tried to prove that things couldn't have happened the way Dr. McCormick said they did, because Francis was struck from behind and not from the front as he would have been during an equal fight. He suggested that Francis beat the doctor in his rage, then wanted to leave the scene of the fight when the other man struck him from behind like a coward. Unfortunately, the doctor who examined Francis's body after the murder couldn't determine whether the blow was dealt from behind or from the front, although in his first report he had suggested that the first possibility in front of the jury he denied that anyone would be able to tell that for sure. There was another shocking part of the trial for us, the testimony of Mr. Reed, Francis's former assistant. It turned out he was a witness for the defense, and his role was to call into question my brother-in-law's morality and prove that Francis had no right to upbraid Dr. McCormick. For Mr. Reed told the jury that he was Francis's illegitimate son from a former lover, a woman named Mary Reed, whom Francis supposedly met in Virginia after the war. She was a maid in the household of the family who were renting a room to the young journalist. Reed claimed that Francis knew that Miss Reed had become pregnant with his child, but he refused to marry her, abandoned her, and came to Charleston. Reed claimed he originally came to Charleston to look for his father and demand his acknowledgement that he was a true son. But Francis only offered him a job as his assistant and a very modest accommodation in the attic of his house. Reed said that Francis ordered him to keep his mouth shut about the truth, otherwise he would lose his job in the room as well. Dear Bart tried to speak up when he heard these lies, but he was not given the opportunity at the trial. Poor Sarah almost fainted when she heard these awful charges against Francis, who wasn't there to defend his honor, not to mention the ingratitude of this young man who had lived under her roof for almost 2 years. Bart later told us the truth about Mr. Reed. Francis indeed had a sweetheart named Mary Reed back in Virginia, but he had to put an end to this when it turned out that Mary was unfaithful to him and had become pregnant with another man's child. When Reed came to Charleston 2 years ago, Francis explained this to the boy. Even so, he was willing to help him for Mary's sake. But Reed wasn't satisfied with Francis's help, so he accused him of lying about his mother from time to time. It seems those few sentences I overheard not long before Francis's death came from a conversation about this topic. At the end of the trial, the jury deliberated only for a short while and declared Francis's death self-defense and Dr. McCormick not guilty. My poor sister fainted when she heard the verdict. She swore to me she would only wear black for the rest of her life, and she'd consider it her lifelong duty to remind the doctor of his guilt every time she saw him. And surely enough, when we saw Dr. McCormick on the street yesterday, Sarah stopped in her tracks, raised her arm to shoulder height, and pointed at him. The doctor crossed hurriedly to the other side of the road. Sarah didn't say a word, only pointed at him, but it was a truly shocking sight, because although she's a small woman, she's quite regal. To tell you the truth, Mr. Reichler, the sight sent chills down my spine. My sister looked like Nemesis herself, the goddess of vengeance, dressed in black from head to toe, pointing with mute and somber accusation at her husband's murderer. For we all know that's exactly what he is, no matter how hard he tried to prove he was innocent and the whole thing was an accident. Not to mention the fact that he tried to tarnish Helene's reputation and mine by claiming we were the ones who tried to seduce him all along. It's a true travesty of our justice system that this horrible human being is still walking around town as if he were not a bully of defenseless women and the murderer of a truly good and noble man. But at least we, Francis's family and real friends, now know the truth. All thanks to you, Mr. Reichler. Please accept our most sincere gratitude for all that you have done for us. Sincerely, Miss Miriam Potts. So that is our final letter. We have a little epilogue here from Anna, but before we read, not an epilogue, a little author's note from Anna. But before we read Anna's author's note, I want to remark about how really well done that final letter was. We frequently talk on this channel about how the sort of epilogue can be a make or break moment for many of these mystery games and letters, and often it feels like the author has run out of energy. And here we get a almost poetic final letter, which is sort of the peak of the writing in this case. The writing has been very good. Anna has a background as a historian, and her writing has been really good. But I think she outdid herself with this final letter because, boy, talk about an ending. This ending scene painted of the wife Sarah stopping in her tracks in all black, silently pointing her accusatory finger at the doctor, does give you chills. And what a poetic ending about how they didn't get justice, but at least they know the truth. This really could not have been done better. And just really beautifully done. And that we got to hear from Sarah and her sister. This is sort of like, this is how it should be done. This is how you have a final letter. You're hearing from two of the characters you care about, and the storytelling to have Miriam be the one who's telling us about all this and giving us this final picture, and this sort of bittersweet ending about how the doctor got away with it. And you can imagine back at this 1800s, makes sense, beginning of the 19th century, makes sense that he would get away with it, but they know the truth. Really beautifully done. All right, before we talk to Anna and hear from Anna, let's read what Anna has written, her author's notes here. Francis's real name was Francis Warrington Dawson, the editor of the News and Courier in Charleston. Remember, this was based on a true story. So this is the real person. He was murdered on March 12, 1889 by Dr. Thomas McDowell after he confronted the doctor in regard what he considered improper advances towards his Swiss governess, Helene Verderin. In reality, Dawson rapped on McDowell's door that afternoon and demanded that the doctor's attention towards the governess cease. McDowell testified that Dawson struck him with his cane, so he shot him and turned himself into the police. McDowell was presented as a victim at the trial, an outraged householder, a happily married man who'd been seduced by a foreigner and then attacked on his own home. Salacious suggestions about the French maid, as she was called despite her being Swiss, were part of the trial's testimony, and McDowell was portrayed by the defense as a common man protecting himself from an attacker who believed he was better than others. He was acquitted in part because the prosecution could not convincingly prove that Dawson had been shot from behind. The wife's real name was Sarah Fowler Morgan. Her diaries were published as a Confederate girl's diary in 1913. Apparently, she went to her grave convinced that her husband was the victim of a political conspiracy. My main source regarding the life of Francis and Sarah was an article by Roxana Robinson, a great-granddaughter, titled The Strange Career of Frank Dawson. For the newspapers and political struggles, I mostly used the article Francis Warrington Dawson and South Carolina's Spirit of 1876, a case study of the perils of journalistic heresy, by Carl Orr Osthaus, who also cited original articles from Francis and his rival, Colonel Robert B. Rhett, Barron's real name. The shooting affair at Hamburg and the challenges were genuine as well, although the club was called the Edgefield Rifles, and the generals in question were General Matthew C. Butler and Martin Witherspoon Gary. I also used a few fictitious characters in the letter: Sarah's sister Miriam, her husband Alcee, and the never-acknowledged illegitimate son David, who are additional characters in William Baldwin's novel, A Gentleman in Charleston, and the manner of his death, based on this real-life murder. I haven't read the novel, only an article about it, Death of a Monarch, A March Afternoon by Jack Trotter. I left out a big chunk of the murderous doctor's story because it seemed a bit excessive, and also because it wasn't known at the time of the trial. It turns out that the doctor asked Helene to marry him, though he already had a wife, Katie, and a mistress, Julia Smith, who was one of his wife's closest friends. He'd apparently bribed his brother Arthur to murder his father-in-law, so that Katie would inherit his considerable wealth, a plot the police had uncovered before it was carried out. The doctor had told his mistress that he planned to kill his wife in order to marry her, and not the governess. During a house call, the doctor also grossly insulted a female patient who later submitted a complaint against McDowell. He was also implicated in an insurance scandal and was charged with signing false death certificates. Eventually, he committed suicide in 1904. Wow, how about that? Very cool. I do not know. Those of you who are writing cases based on real life stuff just blows my mind. That seems so difficult to do, to absorb all these real facts and decide which to keep in. And well, I think it's amazing what Anna has done, what Matt has done before that, but it's very brave to be writing a case like this. This is the first mystery case that Anna has written, and she did it in short order. Debbie Levy helped edit it, but it's amazing to just jump in and do this with no experience, no practice, and no way to test it out. I think it worked remarkably well and was beautifully written. You could see that Anna was a historian. We got some real history. You got one letter that was almost entirely history of the South and the Civil War and all that. Very interesting. I think my favorite sort of emotional letter was this last one with that last scene. Very evocative, very beautifully done. And I loved how we had our different theories that evolved over time. Any other thoughts from the channel about this? I have some constructive suggestions for those wanting to do something like this. And if there is anyone else on the channel who feels like writing a case like this of the Dear Holmes variety, or something like Matt did where you improvise it as we go along, I know, speaking for the entire channel, we'd be happy to play more of these. They are very enjoyable. I love this thing where it unfolds over the course of a month. Harry says, you could write an entire second mystery on Dr. McDowell. Yeah. Melissa says, there's a saying in medicine, when you hear hooves, look for horses, don't go searching for a zebra. Yeah, that's a little comment about Bayesian inference and what's more likely. Anna says, I wrote a few cases like this for my students and you wanted to try one, so here it is. I told you it won't be a hard case. Maybe take you back in time, which is the main goal, really. Yes, I mean, you're touching on the only area of constructive criticism that I would offer, which is that I think it's a very thin line to walk with these Dear Holmes, with these letter-based cases, between do you want to make them so when you get to the end, you know what happened or you're just guessing, and how much doubt you want the players to have when they get to the end. So I think if there is any constructive suggestion, criticism in terms of a mystery, that would just be that there weren't big facts for us to struggle to explain. There were some interesting mysteries, like the whole issue with the gun that you created really worked very well. And the injury to the back of his head worked very well, because those were facts that were hard to explain that we theorized about. And the expose was another one. But I mean, obviously, this is criticism just in terms of if you're aiming for an ideal mystery. It's easy to say the things I'm saying, but it pays to point them out anyway, which is just that in the very best of cases, and we rarely get this in Dear Holmes, but in the very best of cases, I think what you would try to find is you want clues that don't make sense on first reading, and then only when the players come up with a theory do they click into place. And I think what's much more common is what we got here, which is a very good story where the story clicks things into place. Like the story clicked into place at the last letter, that it was the doctor and that his bruises came from the fight and he was met at the park at 7 p.m. rather than the players struggling and reading everything and still not understanding how the pieces go together, but only after theorizing and coming up with this odd theory do things click into place. That is a very hard thing to do. It's not a complaint. I'm just pointing out that sort of in a perfect world, if you're trying to be Agatha Christie and create aha moments, you want facts that don't fall into place until the players put the pieces together like a puzzle. And it says it's hard with the real case, but the New York Noir cases are harder, especially the third one. Those are totally fictitious, so it was easier to make them harder mysteries. Yes. Well, I'm very curious to play Anna's cases now. I mean, you can absolutely see the historical skill that Anna brings to it. But, you know, one thing that's interesting is I think if you read this and I told you Anna was a historian, you would say, oh, that makes sense. Anna is a historian of the American South and Civil War. But that's not the case, is it? Anna, what is your background? Because Anna is in Hungary. Anna does not live in the U.S. And I assume that this is not your specialty area, or is it? Anna says, you were clever to guess that Reed was an illegitimate son and what happened to the gun, so good job. Well, that does raise the point of how we get around some of this. We create our own mysteries here in these letters, and the same is true when we read the Dear Holmes letters. And one of the ways we can create our own mystery is by trying to figure it out early. And so that was a fun part of it. We also figured out that the expose might have been an important part of the motive. So yeah, it is fun to figure those things out ahead of time. And I know we had a lot of fun theorizing about, I would say that excluding this ending letter epilogue scene that I loved, maybe my most favorite part was wrestling with motives. I would say that was my most favorite part, because that was the part where we really were able to pull in theories of psychology and evidence. And somewhere around the second letter, we started really debating about who had a convincing motive. And I liked the idea that we sort of started to rule out the brother-in-law Alcee because of psychological motives. It didn't feel right. And Reed upstairs didn't quite feel right as a motive. And most importantly, the people that seemed most likely to be suspects, the rivals who called him to a duel, we sort of argued that those people don't have good motives because they'd already ruined him and he had already lost face by not agreeing to the duel. So I guess the part that I'm most proud of and most enjoyable was by the time we got through the second letter, I had concluded that the person who had the real motive was the person that he was planning to write the expose on. And then the other people were ruled out. And then the third letter seemed to basically confirm those theories, that the only person who had a motive was the expose person or this doctor who had his own motives. So, yeah, very enjoyable. Anna says, not my specialty. I just researched a bit. I'm more versed in Hungarian history, of course. Yeah, that I would say it's very impressive that you wrote such a convincing story of the South. It seemed real to me. It seemed properly told from the standpoint of people in the South. Pretty impressive. Well, anytime you want to write another, love to play it, or if anyone else feels like they want to try. And it says, that was my goal, keep you guessing about suspects and motives. I'm glad it worked, although I couldn't talk about the doctor until the third letter. Otherwise, he would have been the obvious suspect. Yeah, I think that all worked out well, actually. I wonder if maybe the idea that the doctor had an accident could have been introduced earlier. Maybe that would have left a little bit of a mystery. But I think, you can't make the doctor a complete mystery suspect and still have the storytelling punch of this doctor trying to blackmail Helene. So I think, you were right at that point by the third letter to reveal all that, because it had to be revealed for the story to have impact. So I think you did well by having that all come out. He says, it's a tough question. When do you introduce the real culprit without pointing the finger at him? Yeah, I don't think you can in this case. The only thing you could do is make the details of it. You could try to hide some of the details about it. But I don't think you could really tell the story as well as you told it without having all of the facts about the doctor come out, which basically pinpointed him. And it says, I thought about after you read the first letter, maybe Sarah should have mentioned he's sick or something. Well, in one sense, you did it well because we didn't suspect him, and perhaps our radar should have gone up. Like, I do remember reading that first letter and being like, why are we being told about this doctor? He's a total non-entity. Well, anyway, what a pleasure. How lucky are we that Anna created this for us? Quite special. All right, now let's talk a little bit about our upcoming plans. Next week on Sunday, we will return to Dear Holmes and start a new letter. Whether we start with an old letter or the most recent letter will be up to the channel to decide. But that will be starting next week, and we'll play a month of that, and then we'll decide what to do. We've got enough Dear Holmes letters to last us a long time. And then I do promise that we're going to get back to some live streaming of games soon. And I'll try to give you guys a couple days notice before that. I'm feeling like I could go for something substantial. So maybe I think maybe it's time for Alexander Morrison or Detective Box soon. Some multi-part session. But if you're interested in helping to decide what game we play next, you can stop by the Board Game Geek Guild for this channel. If you're interested in writing a case set in the world of New York Noir, I'd love to have you use the tools I've been writing to do that. And I'm happy to share some of the documents and essays I've written on how to best write a case. And I'd love to have you in this uncharted territory with me, and Anna jumped right in as well. It's not natural. It's a learning process. We're dealing with sort of in new territory here, but Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, similar cases. There's been plenty written. If you're curious about learning how to write a mystery, how to write a story, experimenting, this is the venue for it. We're happy to have experiments. Anna says it was a great experience. Well, that is also wonderful to hear, that it wasn't just a painful experience doing this for Anna. And they don't all have to be as good as this case and the case that Matt did. It's okay to write a bad experimental case and give it a try. We'll still have fun. We'll do it. We'll be able to offer more suggestions if if it turns out badly. It's only YouTube. It's not the end of the world. All right. We're going to sign off here. Happy Easter to everyone if you celebrate it. Happy Sunday if you don't. A real pleasure, an honor to play a game written by someone for this channel doesn't exist elsewhere. A real pleasure. All right, I'll see you guys next time.